Hey everybody, here we are on the Baseline Show once again. I think we've done this now over a year every week, or pretty close. We've done a year of these every single week. So pretty excited to. I don't know if this is exactly our anniversary for this show, but it's getting there. It's good to see everybody. This is a special session for the Baseline Protocol open office hours. We have a good crew here talking about a variety of things. Most important right now, we've got some muting to do. Here, I got you muted there, Jack. We have one nice announcement. We had our first technical steering committee meeting just now, reviewing a set of grant proposals. I think Boris, you're on, right? So Boris, you were one of the people that proposed a grant.
Yep.
And here we are. This is where you go to baseline grants in the Ethereum Oasis repo. And let me see if I can get that a little bigger. We have a number of grants that are being voted right now. There is $100,000 for those who are tuning in, don't know. $100,000 given by graciously by the Ethereum Foundation as a gift to the Baseline Protocol community to fund R&D and enablement projects. There's some variety of rules around this. If you go to the baseline-protocol.org website, you'll see right there the link right there on the main banner for more information on the grants program. So if you're interested, if you're a talented person in a variety of ways, or not just development, but also in content production, if you're a good technical writer, there is an opportunity to get grants and to get in on bounties. We'll be doing both grants and bounties there. And we just voted on 2 of them. I think the votes are still coming in. So we'll tally those votes, I think, by we're running it Friday night, and let folks like our friends here know about that so Boris, you'll know on Friday, we hope, to get the grant. I think Bishwashri Day is another person who she's often been on these office hours. She's from India, and there's a whole bunch of people coming in from India now, and we expect that as that group grows, that there'll be more of a pull towards doing more meetings and events in time zones that are friendly to that. Samrat, I think you will be happy about that, if I'm not mistaken. Yep.
Yeah, but it's going good so far. So never mind.
Okay. Right on. We have a lot of people here today. So with unless there are any other items to discuss, I think we should just jump right into what we're here for today. And that is talking about the V1 Baseline Protocol roadmap. So I'll just give a very brief overview of that. There are 2 things about the Baseline Protocol. If anybody's been involved knows, you have the standards that are being written, and you have a base of code. The most connected code to the standard is what we call the core, and that's in the core library in the Baseline Protocol repo. And I'll bring that up real quick. I think I will. Yeah. So here's the repo. And if you go in here, you'll see core right there. The core packages implement the standard. And so the standard and the core are pretty tightly connected. What we are going to do in the next several weeks is plan out and execute or begin executing our march to version 1. We are at V01, and we want to get to version 1 this year. And it takes about 6 months to ratify a standard through the Oasis and get it to an ISO, the ability to go to ISO as a standard. So we'd love to have that standard specification written in final draft really in the summer timeframe. So we're really cooking now. Any questions? Any comments? I see a Jack, Jesse, Tim, Sam. We got Mark Haddle up there. Nick Kritikos. And I keep on hiding the link from Nick so they forget, but he always finds it. Always shows back up. Tom Lyons was actually the first grant award winner. Tom, your hard work. Would you like to say a couple words about that before we get going?
What can I say? A grant is a nice thing. No, that was, I think I mentioned this last time we spoke. So the grant process is pretty straightforward, and I've got a mandate now to go and do some needs analysis and some guidelines on non-technical content to help the outreach team. And I'm just scheduling a bunch of interviews now, and I'm actually kicking around the idea of doing maybe an open questionnaire, but I'll talk. I think that might be interesting to get the community's input on a broader scale. So yeah, but anybody interested in a grant, I have to say it's a pretty easy process to get that in.
Right on. And would you like to say like how could people be involved with you? I know you're interviewing folks for you want to say something about the work and anything
Yeah,
that
so
people can help out with?
I mean, the idea I think is relatively straightforward. So the assumption is that to help baseline outreach, we're going to need, along with the standard and the core packages and all the technical stuff, we're probably going to need a fair amount of non-technical content. Explaining what baseline is, who it's for, what the use cases are, and sort of a mix of thought leadership and probably a bit of salesy stuff to help get the word out, and talk to decision makers, people interested in using in making use of the protocol for whatever their needs are, or people who are working on selling baseline consulting services, et cetera. So because this is a open source project, obviously most of that content's probably going to come, or hopefully will come, from volunteers or grant recipients like myself. And the idea is to help encourage participation by basically starting off with a bit of a needs analysis and kind of a set of guidelines, and basically a content plan. This is the kind of stuff we're looking for. And if you want to contribute on this kind of content, this is what you need to do. This is what we'd like you to do. So that's sort of like a step one on hopefully encouraging a lot of really great non-technical content from the community.
Very good. I'm looking at some comments on the thing already. We've got a lot of comments already. I think one was from Mr. M asking about, he's an insurance company. We're all stuck with private blockchains is the way to get started with public blockchains because gas price has been a killer. And of course, I think that's, I'm glad that Mr. M, that you've asked that question, because one of the things that's important about the baseline protocol is that it's pretty gas minimal, and that you're not doing a lot on a chain of any kind. We're effectively a bulletin board for proofs, and you can use fancy batching, as I like to call it, and other things to kind of get out of the way of the gas issue. Of course, as ETH2 comes, I think we have a lot of headway, and layer 2 is going to help as well. And we're going to talk about some of those layer 2 issues on this call, and every call this month. We'll be basically talking about the roadmap. That's what we're going to do on these calls. Calls, I think, do we call them calls anymore? Is that still a thing? Do we call them calls? I used to get up at 5 in the morning when I lived in California, and I'd have to be on conference calls all morning long and all day long. I would I think there was a week where I didn't actually shower. I just got up and
that was before cell phones, John.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. After a cell phone, you could just do the call in the shower with the cell phone. It was fine. But yeah. So every Wednesday this month, or I guess through May, we will be discussing, things that we ought to be putting into V1. And folks like Sam and other maintainers are going to be important to that. Andreas, I'm sure, is going to have a lot to say about that. He's been working really hard on the standard. I bet Anais Frank, who's our standards leader, is probably on the chat. She often is. Hi, Anais, if you're watching. So I'll be watching for any comments you have there, Anais. Carl, you had a lot to think about and say regarding, as I recall, EDI. So we have a lot of things to think about. But this is going to be a safe place today, in particular, to talk about sort of the what do we not. Yeah, there's an old saying, if we only knew what we didn't know, right? So can we peer into the edges of what we've defined as a set of things that this thing can do? And can we say, oh, well, we forgot this. Oh, well, wait a minute, we forgot that. So everybody put on your happy hats and think about let your mind wander through the multiverse of different ideas. I was tweeting this morning. I think I was taking a walk, and I said, imagination is just is evidence of being tapped into the multiverse, right? So, what is what things are we missing? Almost certain that there are a variety of things. Of course, we kind of need to know what's in there. So if you haven't gone to baseline-protocol.org and gone into the repo and looked around and looked at the roadmap, do so. Sam, maybe you can give us a quick overview, and then we'll kick it off. Please, anybody at this point, feel free to chime in.
Hi, John. I'm a first timer here. I'm sorry, my name is my parent company's name. My name is Mohan.
Hey, Mohan.
And I'm bringing a fresh set of eyes. I know nothing. I just been going through the specifications, so enjoying it. But really, I had talked to Kyle. Kyle had given me sort of a rundown on things, and I'm just filling myself up, going through, I think, the specification and then the Swagger API set. And I'm hoping that, and then looked at the fact that you had two connectors. One was spreadsheet, and one I think was a SAP connector, if I'm not mistaken. So, and then I noticed yesterday there was some EDI scheme that had come out. So I'm just going to be going through them, and then as I get a little more, plugged in, I'll chime in. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohan. It's great to see you. Love to hear more about your company and what you're doing as well. So Sam, do we want to throw anything up on the screen, or shall we just kind of talk through the stuff?
Happy to throw anything on the screen. What are you looking for in particular?
Let's just get a little primer, right? So what are the basics that are going into V1? Andreas, maybe you can also talk about the standards, and be the standard bearer for the standards team today, if you can. Sure. And let's kind of just go through the very basic outlines of what is on the agenda for version 1. So, for example, the persistence package needs work. We have connectors that was one of the proposals just this morning, was for connectors to a variety of other systems. So yeah, would you like to kind of take us through what are the basics that need to go through? And in fact, while you're setting up, Sam, Andreas, why don't you talk about the standard and what from the standards perspective we're already thinking we need to put in for the V1.
Yeah, thank you, John. So we're doing something highly unusual in standards work. We are writing a standard as reference implementations are being implemented. So that is highly unusual. Typically, you write a whole bunch of code, then customers complain because they need to buy 5 versions of the same code, and then they're saying, no guys, you need to figure this shit out. And then the different vendors saying, yeah, okay, maybe. And then one of the big customers is saying, you know what? It's I'm gonna write it myself if you can't do it because the pain is too great. Then they all get together and say, okay, let's talk about what we have and whose stack is better than the other stack. So that takes a long time. Case in point, TCP/IP took late 73 till 85, 12 years. And that's really simple. I mean, TCP/IP is not hard from a standard point of view. Well, what was then very hard, but it's so standards take years. We don't have that time. because if you write a standard and it takes you 3 years, then whatever you write the standards off is already out of date, like painfully out of date. So
and there are layers to this standard too, right? I mean, there's the
Right.
basic things like transport and what kinds of messaging
Right.
protocols you're
So-
allowed to
so-
use, but then there's also I don't know how much we'll get into it, but there's also sort of higher layers like formats and schema, right?
Right. So we're in the standards work. We start off what you need to. First of all, you need to all talk about the same thing in the same language. So that's really important. You know, that's step number one. That takes a little time. But is really important because once everybody talks about the same thing in the same way, then that makes collaboration and especially interoperability a lot easier. And then you need to say, okay, what is sort of like the basic components that you need no matter what. I don't care how you implement it. It's like these are the basic things that you need if you want to achieve this particular goal, which you state and define in the standard. And from there on, you take those components and layers apart and start defining the things as you see fit, informed by ongoing development work, as well as informing ongoing development work based on the discussions that are had. And things like what we're going to do today is go in and peel the onion, do an outside in view to figure out what are we missing, what are we potentially missing, what do we need to look at, and what do we need to A, specify and B, build, or build and then specify, right? Or do it at the same time. So it's a very different approach to standards work. By the way, an approach that other organizations are starting to adopt as well.
By the way, I'm broadcasting the on the YouTube. You'll see that I'm showing off the standards, the initial standards drafts.
So is that have I done enough of a PSA
Yeah,
for
that was
Sam?
a good PSA. You want to break down the kind of the angles on this? Like, what are the components that or the elements I'm seeing here? We've got the table of contents, we've got that design and architecture, we've got an API and data model.
Right. So the main thing is you from the architecture need to break down the components that you have around messaging, privacy, how you do the actual execution of the requests, of the transactions. You need to define what the actors are within an instance of baseline and how they work together. What do they mean? And then you need to talk about all the fun stuff about what if you have multiple instances running of the same thing? How can you avoid how you make that collision resistant, blah blah blah. So these are all things that are fun, that need to be thought through. How do you define identity, especially identity in a way that is not only makes sense within one stack, but is portable, etc., etc. How do you ensure interoperability? Data exchange, schemas. It's like how do you do versioning? How can you discover things? Those are all very, very important areas that need to be agreed upon, because you want to be able to have an ecosystem of baseline instances that are interoperable, and then and potentially can also spontaneously form networks, right? So you can have ephemeral networks of baseline instances that allow you to execute, for example, multi-party compute in real time, trustless multi-party compute in real time. And in order to do that, they all need to understand each other.
Right. So, for example, if Jack's company Provide is working with a group of companies that are generating some baseline exit workflow, like an invoice or something, but then there's a financial organization or a set of organizations that are that can do something with that, maybe finance them, that are using a different baseline compliance stack. There should be no effort to have those two work groups interop, right?
Yeah, and if you're using the same cryptographic suite, you should be able to then smoothly interoperate. But these are the things that the standard needs to define and say, if you want to interoperate, these are the things you all need to agree upon, and if you don't, it ain't gonna work. So that
Yeah.
those are the key thing. It's not just like, how do I manage a work group, so the participants in a workflow, but is also because I'm dealing with cryptography. It's like which cryptography am I using? What version of it, right? Am I using it as a JW, am I using, signature algorithms as a JWK, as a JWS? It's like these are all nuances that are lost on most people, because most people are not familiar with that. But if they are not agreed upon, shit ain't gonna work.
Right. So thanks, Andreas. That's really good. I'll say that the work has gone very well on the standards team so far. A very good team, and at this point, it's coming down to, really drafting the essential parts of the standard, and making sure that those are consistent, vice versa with the core implementation. And that's around the API. So I've put the link in both chats for anybody that wants to follow along. I'd really encourage everybody to read that stuff if you can. Anybody that has a dog in the hunt, as it were, for making sure that your company can get what it needs out of baselining. Mehran, I see you there. I think one of the interesting questions is, what are things in the standard and in the core that are going to need to be there to work well with things like SAP? So I'm sure you'll have lots of thoughts on that. I know, Boris, you're working a lot on zero knowledge circuits. You're using NARC, but as we discussed, it would be important that any zero knowledge circuit component, proprietary or open source, should be able to operate as long as it's compliant with the standard, right?
By the way, John, this is a great point around standards work. It's like, if you have a cryptographic suite to be used in baseline that requires a trusted setup, what are the requirements? Right?
Great example. Yeah.
Can anybody do a trusted setup? It's like, how do I know that you're still not keeping the toxic waste around and are screwing everybody and their cousin over? Oh, and by the way, because all other stacks are using that, suddenly you have a solar wind, right? It's like,
yeah.
and I mean a solar wind squared, right?
That's a great example of a problem,
because you're screwing with then tokens and all of the stuff, right? You can like, really do some really major damage.
What do you think the current state of the standards team is on that, Andreas? Do you think that we're in a place where we're going to say you can't do that? Or yeah, I don't think we've even talked about it. I can imagine a couple of angles on that, right? One is, so we've already identified a thing that we should be adding to the list for V1 is, what do you do about that? What do you do about trusted setup? And it could be a should not, you could say, or it could be a, if you have a certain type of trusted setup, then you must inform, right? There must be a message passed to all work group counterparties, informing them. It may be that. But these are the kinds of things that
you
we
might
have
be
to decide.
using one trusted setup, right? There's a public ceremony that baseline service providers are doing, just as was done with in late 2019 with pretty much every single L2 that is currently operating on the Ethereum mainnet is using the same crypto suite. Why? Because it allows you to higher performance. You can squeeze a lot more circuits into that, and you need a publicly verifiable trusted setup. So the question is, are we recommending that? If you need a trusted setup, there are other schemes that do not require a trusted setup. There are performance trade-offs, size trade-offs. What are we going to do? Are we, it's like there's there are 50,000 things to choose Sunday that implementers need to think about, and the standards team needs to do recommendations for those implementers, because if we screw that one up, you could potentially open up a barn door where you really didn't want to.
Right on. Okay. So that's the pretty big, high level overview of standards. There's a ton of work, and we have a standards meeting every Thursday. If you're interested in that work and you have again, if you have a product or a company or a solutions firm that needs this stuff to work in a certain way, in order for you to do your job, or to sell new business on the Baseline, moniker, I guess, then you're going to want to be involved in that, because you do not want to be caught unawares. If the group who shows up decides to go hang a hard left into something that would mess up what you're doing, and you're not there, you're going to not know, you're going to have trouble, and you're not even going to see it coming. So make sure you're showing up if you've got a dog in that hunt.
And all
Carl,
is transparent on GitHub, John.
and it's all, well, yeah, if you take the trouble of reading it, yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're concerned, you better read, right?
Exactly. So we've already had some really good, I've got to say, it's very impressive how little contentiousness we've seen so far in that work. I hope I'm knocking on wood. As the heat turns up, there's going to be points of view, and we're going to have to work them out. We have an excellent leader in Ana Frank, who really knows how to run a team. So we'll go over there. Hey, Carl, I know you had a lot of thoughts. Now, if we want to switch over to, so let me tee things up this way. The basic thing you get to do with baselining is make sure that thing A in system X is the same verifiably as thing B in system Y. That's it, really, right? In a nutshell, that's what it does. And it uses a machine that is holding on to proofs to make sure that we can verifiably confirm that. Anybody want to offer a different way of summarizing the work? Where's my? I'm looking for my crickets button here.
John, I have a question. If nobody else asks or comes chimes in, I have a question to follow with respect to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you look at a spreadsheet, I mean, I looked at the objects that you're currently dealing with, the invoices, the purchase orders, and so on and so forth. So it's really supply chain kind of world. When you're looking at spreadsheets, is there a consistency aspect where you're looking at it simply as data? So do two organizations have the same data? You're not, if you look outside of supply chain, objects that flow between organizations, and you look at it as, do I have the same source of truth that another organization is using? So that could be just the records in an Airtable and database, or is that well within the domain of what consistency does?
100%. And if anybody knows the Airtable folks, have them join us. We would love to see them.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with Airtable, so that's
they ought to be sponsoring. Frankly, I think I ought to give them a call, or one of the Oasis people will. But yeah, the Airtable is a good example. One of the grant proposals today is to baseline Excel. With plugins. There's already a set of earlier plugins that probably need a little updating at this point, that LimeChain and others did around Google Sheets. What's cool is that you can actually lock up those sheets too. So you can actually say, well, this row is baselined with Microsoft Dynamics, and you can lock it up. You can say
that's hugely powerful.
Yeah.
This is a great example, John, of where you need different implementation options than what currently exists, right? It's like if I baseline a row and then I'm thinking, oh, I want to baseline this and that, and then I multiply that by the number of spreadsheets that are out there. I just, and now I'm uttering my favorite line. I just blew up mainnet. Um,
That is your favorite line.
It is my favorite
You
line, John,
blew up the
isn't it?
mainnet. I'm like,
You just blew
really?
up. You just blew up
Really?
mainnet. Yes, you did. Because of just the data that you just dumped on. However, there are zero knowledge type methods that you can use where you can have trillions of rows being quote unquote baselines, ensuring data integrity, um, without data spamming mainnet, and in a very commons oriented, sensible and gentle way, you still use Ethereum mainnet.
Right on.
Can I make a, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and this is kind of what I was hoping for. When you were discussing this, I was reminded that, and Sam, this is where we're going to get interesting. I was reminded of a feature requirement. So what we really want to be doing here is throwing out, and you can put them on chat. You can say, hey, I'd like to talk about this problem or that thing, or this feature or this non-functional requirement. It has to have this kind of performance vector. It has to be this maintainable, or, I used to work on, all the ILIDs for a company, right? Maintainability, scalability, kind of keeping track of all that stuff. In this case, there's both functional and non-functional requirements to make this work. And I'm just gonna offer two of them. And if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see these pop up. And we actually have some of these issues already, but I'll be a little redundant here and put in debasing and rebasing. That is, if there needs to be in V1 a way to get a signal that you've been debased. That is, your version of the record is no longer consistent with what the proof would tell you it should be, and the ability to synchronize by getting that back. Getting the original data. Run a session with the original counterparties, either one or more. And there may be other schemes for that as well that people can come up with. So I'm going to say that debasing and rebasing really should be in there for V1 in case we were not going to put it in for V1. It needs to be there. And the other one is revisioning. The baseline, in order to baseline, you need to be able to do this. You don't want to make the mistake of having something where you can't go back and forth on an agreement, for example. You want to be able to say, hey, I just did this purchase order. Oh yeah, but you got something wrong. I need you to change it. If you're locked in and can't change that, or if it's not easy, that would be not okay. So that feature needs to be there. And now that I've thrown a couple of them out, what does that give you guys thoughts about? Mehran, do you have any thoughts about interop, about what it needs to do with SAP? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do that a lot to people,
No,
so it's all
sure.
good.
No, I was thinking about 2 points. One, Andreas said that previously there were implementations and then a standard, and now we are working standard and implementation at the same time. So I think we really have to get more involved in different implementations because that's maybe is the main way to know what we don't know. So that's kind of a note to myself as well.
Yeah, I think SAP is already in like several of the existing known professional implementations that are going out there. In other words, as far as I know, we're working on one ourselves, so we haven't disclosed. But there's I think the Coca-Cola one, Kona, involves SAP. Is that right, Jack?
Well, that's another team in SAP. So it's SAP is huge. There are a lot of teams. So from our team, we also have to get more involved with the implementation. I think that helps to kind of describe all those missing points in the standard as well. Mm-hmm. And about the example of Excel or what you mentioned for debasing and rebasing and versioning, I was thinking what I kind of missed in the baseline was when there is only a bilateral agreement when there are only two parties that they want to interact with each other. This is usually the case that you might not even need blockchain or any reference that is a distributed database. Maybe you just need digital signature and kind of chaining your changes for versioning. I'm not sure, do we have something like this in current baseline implementation?
Well, I'm writing this down because you're bringing up something interesting, which is related to that, which is right now a bilateral. You can construct multilateral, that is, many different counterparties in a workflow, but you right now can only do bilateral work steps. And if anybody's confused about those two words, go back to the documentation. It's all right there. The cardinality here is that you have work groups, work flows, and work steps in a baseline scenario. So a work step is all bilateral. It needs to go to multilateral so that you can have one work step. It gives you more composability. But the minute you do that, you're getting into issues of questions of griefing versus an issue of not having consistency, right? So if one of the counterparties is not responsive, it just doesn't send back its proof, and you say that every counterparty in this particular work step must send back its signature and go back in the proof. If you require that on the wrong kind of work step, you've brought the entire workflow to a halt. So there needs to be a way. That's a feature. I just wrote it down. And again, most of these that I'm putting in are already in the issues list. But I'm just trying to illustrate for folks. Clearly, you're going to want to be able to. In Fabric, we call these transaction policies. Here, we could call them work step policies that allow you to decide on a work step by work step basis, the balance of those issues.
John, there's already a requirement for that.
I know. That's what I was saying.
No.
I think I wrote it.
It's already in the no. It's actually in my PR.
Oh, in the standard side.
On the standard side, yes.
Yeah. It's also in the tech work as well.
Right. And one little point here is that and this is a plug for some other work that's going on. Tomorrow there is going to be a vote on a draft standard around a DLT-based commercial and operational framework for billing within telco, which introduces the concepts of smart bilaterals and smart omnilaterals. And yes, Maran, you need actually even for bilateral interaction, you need the common frame of reference, because even within organizations, their systems of record are not necessarily synchronized. A case in point, if you, for example, issue a quote for a service, right? What happens often, especially in the telco world, is that the buyer accepts the quote from the seller, and then the operations team on the seller side is like, no, dude, you just sold a service that is no longer existent, or we can't fulfill that requirement. What the heck? Well, but your inventory said you could. It's like, well, dude, it changed. It's like you're so there are instances where the asynchronous or non-synchronized systems on each side of the bilateral actually causes the synchronization between those two organizations to fall out of sync, because the buyer's going to go, where's my service? And the seller's going to like,
could you,
sorry,
Andreas, I see a couple of people went off mute. Maybe they're interested in talking about that. Could you put a link into the chat about where we can find details on that? It's coming up on Thursday, right?
The vote's coming up on Thursday. What I'm going to put is a link to a white paper so the Metro Ethernet Forum published, and so everybody can read up about that. By the way, if you actually look into the white paper, you will recognize that option 1 that's discussed is actually baseline.
But exactly on this example, Andreas, so maybe we can redefine it and say that contract is not finalized until, I don't know, the inventory manager also confirms it. Then do you still need that common reference? That common framework?
Yeah, that is unfortunately not commercial reality in the telco side. So it's
On the
like
telco
it is
side.
other it's just not. It's like the left hand side doesn't know what the right hand is doing in the same organization.
Well, so Andreas, can you give us a sense of where in the baseline, in what baseline can do? I mean, you could write an application with some baselining in it that deals with that. But is there anything about baseline? It's the baseline protocol, the core or the standard itself that needs to address that directly.
So one of the things is, and that is actually also
because you could just decide, right? Well, oh, I'm gonna baseline at the POA, or I'm gonna do a baseline on the POA, but I'm also my application stack is gonna say, but I'm not gonna believe it until some future other event occurs, right? And that, so you could deal with it at the application level and in the way you're implementing baselining. But is there something about baseline itself that needs to be tweaked, or is there a feature or a non-functional requirement there?
So the non-functional requirement is that the workflow is strictly deterministic. That
Okay.
takes care of that, because then you have a quote, but the order is not accepted. And if the order is not accepted, then you can't commit to the service, or you're not going to commit to the service. Does that require a whole lot of back and forth offline because people are starting to yell at each other? What went wrong? Of course. But your systems of record your commercial state between the two entities has not entered into a state that has to be reconciled.
Right on. Thanks for that. That's very interesting. Mehran, does that begin to address the other thing that I'm guessing, Mehran, that you're going to be interested in is how do you get to a schema mapping that will, without putting everybody through hell every time they try to set up a workflow, that has a chance of getting baselined at all, because you've got one schema on one end and another schema on another, right?
Yep.
So that work is going on in the standards team right now. I'm sure you're on the team, so you should be aware. I'm interested in, like, what are the translator systems that you find most appealing, in an SAP framework, that and how would they interoperate? How would they work with this? Right, I've got like MuleSoft or something where I'm translating between different systems. How do I get that proof rendered in that environment?
Yeah, I've not worked on that level. I would say with different tools, but so we usually have SAP standard data models. So usually there is not that many translations from different schemas. But I have to see when they want to integrate to other networks, what they do. So since most of the time it's been a mutual integration, just point-to-point integration, I'm not sure if there is a standard way for all of them, because again, there are different systems in SAP and each of them might use different tools. But I can have a look at that.
Yeah, John, one other thing off of that, and then it was talked about, I think Andreas mentioned it earlier, was the kind of the identity piece, right? The authorization piece. And I'm curious from the group, if that's something that's going to be kind of beefed up or focused on as kind of a pillar of baselining, or if it's going to be more tangential and just kind of, something that's in the ecosystem. From our experience, and I've got a project coming up involving trade finance where different international sovereigns are trying to identify if if their corporates can actually perform a transaction, right? Now, it's not just integrating their systems point to point, like was just stated. There's usually like humans involved at some part of that workflow that either bless the transaction or attest to it or something, and they bring along their identity, essentially their digital identity, to integrate as part of that transaction or add metadata as part of that transaction. So I'm curious, what kind of focus or what kind of implementation details are going to be needed for identity and digital identity with regarding baselining.
Well, there's two things but by the way, why don't we go offline, Carl, if we can,
Sure.
and go more on this. But we'll address it now, but also I think there's a lot to be covered there. One thing that, we already have stipulated that we're going to be supporting the DID, W3C, verified credentials and DIDs. And I think finally, after years, it seems like it's going to be a thing. More and more companies are going to, be issuing those QR codes, and we'll all be in identity nirvana in a few years, maybe, hopefully. But we're going to support that standard. But one of the things that's, one of the things you can put in that well-known file, for example, in the payload of a DID is you could put the schema, right? You could say, hey, whenever I get this, I could see a standardization in a particular industry, maybe around EDI, that says, I'm going to publish how I'm going to treat your EDI baseline workflow. And when I'm setting up the work group, I can imagine, advanced tools coming out from companies like Provide and companies like Consensus and others will say, hey, the latest feature is, pre-introspection on baseline mapping of this particular record, right? Based on metadata that's in the metadata component of the DID. I can see that happening.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, because even in the EDI world, setting up a direct connection between two trading partners, it's a repetitive process, but there's usually some manual mapping involved, right? And there's metadata that goes in that each the buyer and seller tend to have very specific to them, right? And I see baselining as possibly replacing a lot of that laborious kind of onboarding,
Sure,
so that a lot of this gets automated.
I'll tell you what, I think that, and you're an EDI person, I think a hell of a grant proposal that would be interesting if it was written, if it was good, well-written grant proposal. I think we could spend some money on an EDI, pick your format, GS1 or Edifact, whatever, or what is it, X12, right? Could be, if somebody mapped that into a baseline process, right? Where do we need zero knowledge circuits for that? Where do we need to just publish the specifications for field level requirements, right? So that my SAP system on this side and your Dynamics system on that side and your Oracle NetSuite system on that side, need to know that you have to implement these things in this way, right? That would be a wonderful project for somebody to pull off.
John, can I make a comment on the schema mapping portion?
Yeah.
Yeah, my background is from TIBCO, which was doing this integration and message brokering and messaging in general. And but more recently, some of my colleagues from there have started companies like Workato, which is like the high-end Zapier,
sure,
if you will. And so in Workato, I think they go with the model of recipes. So you have recipes that allows systems to kind of find a common data model or object model on which they operate. So there is a intrinsic mapping that goes on. So it might be, I don't know, but it might be worthwhile bringing the Workato folks. I mean, they're obviously, doing really well as a company goes. And it might be worthwhile bringing them into the fold to sort of see how they deal, whether there's something like a recipe that is part of the works, that's an object model, or
sure,
it's part of the DID, that you're talking about, and therefore it needs to be a part of the specification. And you kind of are we agreeing on this recipe, and therefore, okay, we're gonna, it's going to be the proof. It's going to be one of the proof elements in this work step or workflow.
Right on. So Workato, if you're watching, come and join the Baseline Protocol. Go to baseline-protocol.org and get into the Slack channel in the upper right corner. There's a little button there. You can get into the Slack channel. You can sponsor. You can be part of the team. I think that's a great idea. So I wrote a couple of other items down. Does anybody have ensure workflow is strictly deterministic? That's already in there. Ability to go from a baseline record to a token. So I don't know where along the line somebody was talking about something, and it struck me that one of the things that is going to be important is, and this may have some Chainlinky, Oracle-y type stuff involved, but in general, right? If you have something like Aave or something like an NFT or something like that. Right now, the state of the art is to take some information and manually create an NFT out of it, and then you can do things like do lending and DeFi against it. But it has been pointed out a number of times, and I wholeheartedly agree with this. You have a lot of the attributes of a token in a baseline record. You've got a degree of tamper resistance. You have assurance that the counterparties that are relevant agree on the data, and you can go to this proof to make sure that there's been no shenanigans. It's not tokenized, but it's got some token attributes. And for CS majors will remember, hashing, a hash is the original token, and in fact that proof looks an awful lot like a hash, and that's a token. So maybe it is tokenized in that there is a baseline proof, a hash on the mainnet that indicates that this has consistency. But that's not the same as tokenizing, right? If God forbid, if you wanted to do this, I don't know why I would want to put my open data about my private invoice on a giant threat surface like a private or public blockchain in a token form. But I could take the baseline proof and put it into a token as a URI sort of, or a kind of URI. So that's one way to do it. But in any event, you're going to, whether you're putting data from that record in the clear into a token of some kind on the blockchain for reasons that make sense, or you want to do something like I just described, we need some way of getting from the record to a tokenized event. So there's going to be rules around that. I think Andreas has been talking about that a lot lately. Does that make sense? Don't necessarily need any comment on it. I was just, that's something that's on folks' mind. But I mean, if I'm off base there.
Actually, John, you need to go one step further if that token is because you now need to think about the compliance and legal ramifications, right? Because we want to do everything certainly above board, right? So
sorry. Yeah, and that in fact, because we're in the interest of time, that in fact, that leads to another thing, which is, I'm going to put it right down here. If anybody's watching the YouTube, you'll see the screen. We need, what was I going to say? We're going to need the mapping of, integration of real contracts systems. In other words, whether it's DocuSign or some other, something like Clause. I'm a big fan of Clause. Their backend is not a blockchain necessarily, but they are generating business rules that could be turned into zero-knowledge circuits and could be executed. You could certainly baseline the business logic of that contractual agreement, and now you have that embodied in the ultimate in your termination. Andreas, I fear that I cut you off too soon.
No. You're absolutely right. So that actually has like two very interesting components to it, because you need to represent. Let's just take let's say you want to issue a security, right? That is based on some off-chain assets, right? It's like, hey, you have 20, you have the NFTs of last year's LA Lakers championship team, right? And you want to securitize them, right? And so In order to do that, you need actually an investment contract. But the investment contract is its own workflow, right? So not only do you need, you need to have the NFTs baselined, or you need to include them as a reference in the investment contract. And then in that investment contract, that needs to be referenced in the token that represents the investment contract, right? So you're combining multi-party compute, ideally trustless, with in baseline, with tokenization,
And you get dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Well, no, I mean, you have, but you see how you're, you won't get around the complexities of, unfortunately, the complexities of existing frameworks that are just like goddamn bad. But it's your call whether you want to go to jail or not, right?
Right on. We're getting to the top of the hour. Dhruv, I saw you had a point about use cases, ensuring surveillance of variants of C19. Did you want to elaborate on that?
I had the idea because yesterday I was seeing a seminar organized by some precision genomics companies, Illumina, which does large scale sequencing of genomes for finding the variants, and for trying to ensure the privacy of the tests of people's PII data has to be kept private, but at the same time we can have their data can be used to be inferred to try to find out patterns of how different variants are progressing. So federated learning is a very promising field, which is currently being researched by IBM and other big companies. So
do you have thoughts about what kind of features or attributes baselining would need to support in V1 to accommodate that?
Yeah, so I will share a paper from World Economic Forum, which was exactly highlighting the standards that they use. So I haven't gone through all of that, but I will be happy to share it with the
right on
channel.
Yeah, let's go into it. And again, we're going to have more of these through May. So let's talk more about that. The other one before, and this was related to your previous comment, Dhruv. I think relevance mapping, or even salience maybe, where you have lots of fields perhaps, but we're only going to baseline field X and Y, right? We're only going to get these two things. That can bring down a lot of these mapping issues, where you might say, well, I've got a first name, middle name, last name, but you only have first name and last name, and for some reason I have a requiring middle name. By saying, look, the only thing that's going to baseline here are the price and the SKU number, whatever it is, then you can reduce that surface area. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah. QED. All right. Any last words? This has been, I don't know about you guys, but I felt like that we got work done today. That's fun. I like getting work done. We'll tag this up. Sam, I know I asked you to go into the overview on this stuff, but you've done like that about 10 times over on these calls. So thanks for that as always. And we can be bagging and tagging some of these issues. Please, everybody who's on this call and everybody who's watching, anybody who cares about this stuff, go into baseline-protocol.org and go into the repo and start writing issues, or at least go on to Slack and say, hey, everybody, or in the dev channel or in the maintainers group, go in and say, hey, look, you're forgetting a feature and I'm going to need this feature. Or have you considered these performance issues? That's what we're here for. Any last words? All right, it's time for my favorite song. Good to see everybody. We'll see you next week. Same time, same channel.
Baseline.
Bye, guys. Thank you.